Hello guys and welcome to Witchcraft and Criminal History. How are you doing today? Hopefully you're doing well. Well, today we're doing a crime video. Yay! And I know for a fact that I've been rather preoccupied recently. I haven't been doing many videos on either witchcraft or criminal history for a little while. But I'm doing one for criminal history, so because that's been rather quiet for quite some time. Okay, this is on a case I know a hell of a lot about, and it's a fascinating case. It's a real fascinating case which occurred in the late 1880s, early 1890s, when it became publicly, aware. And this person is considered the first serial killer in United States history. However, he isn't. There are others in the US what predate H.H. Holmes. For example, the Bloody Benders, who predated H.H. Holmes. And I think there may probably be ones, probably even before the Bloody Benders. But anyway, we're not talking about them, we're talking about H.H. Holmes. So yay, if you haven't guessed it, this video is on H.H. Holmes. And we're also discussing things as well, in regards to this case. Because like I said, it's a fascinating case, and H.H. Holmes is very, very rare. He is very, very rare. He was rare back in the day, and he's rare today. Amongst serial killers, he's extremely rare. All right, let's go. H.H. Holmes, or Henry Howard Holmes, was born Herman Webster Mudget on May 16th, 1861. And he was the child of Livy Horton Mudget and Theodore Page Price. They were both English immigrants at the time, and they were very, very strong in their beliefs. So they were Methodists. And he was brought up in Gilmanton, New Hampshire, in the United States. Herman Webster Mudget was the third child of theirs. He had an older sister named Ellen, an older brother named Arthur, a younger brother named Henry, and a younger sister named Mary. However, one thing because I've actually read the book Bloodstains by Jeff Mudget. You might think, oh, that name sounds familiar. Jeff Mudget. Jeff Mudget is the great-great-grandson of H.H. Holmes. And he actually stated in his book that during this time, when he was about 6 years of age, he was sexually assaulted by a priest when he was 6 years of age. Whether that is true or not, once again, we do not know. We don't know whether that is true, whether he was sexually assaulted by a priest at that particular time, but it's an interesting fact. And, H.H. Holmes was a very bright boy. Very, very bright, and he usually kept to himself when he was at school. He was quite often a victim of bullying. A lot of the other kids, like to bully H.H. Holmes or Herman Webster Mudget. And one day they took the bullying way too far. They took him into a doctor's office and put a skeleton's hand on his face. Instead of being mortified, by it and being scarred for life, he actually thoroughly enjoyed it, and he was fascinated from it. And since that day, Herman Webster Mudget was obsessed with anatomy. He became obsessed and wanted to learn as much as possible about anatomy. And as he was growing up, a lot of animals was disappearing. Cats, dogs, other forms of wildlife as well, all disappearing. And it was said to believe that Herman Webster Mudget was actually dissecting them in his basement. But whether that's true or not, they don't know. We don't know when he first started killing. But one of the suspected murders, which was for a cousin of his, whose name was also Mary Mudget. So there must be a couple of Marys. Because Mary Mudget supposedly drowned in a river. They're not quite sure whether Mary Mudget was, drowned by accident, or whether she had assistance, i.e. someone held her below the water. And they suspect that Mary Mudget could very well have been H.H. Holmes' first victim. He would have been about 8 years of age at this particular time, roundabouts, and is not unknown for serial killers to start that young, or around that age. Heck, we discussed it early on in this channel, with Mary Bell. Fair enough, she was about 9 or 10 years of age, a couple of years older than Holmes, but she still were able to commit some serious crimes. And because of that, is not unheard of that they start so young. So it's not unusual whether or not he actually did commit a crime. His first murder at that tender age is not unknown, and is not unheard of. And there's a boy over in India who, around about the same age, was already an experienced serial killer at that age, around 8 or 9 years old. 8 to 9 years of age, and he was already an experienced serial killer in India. So this isn't unheard of that somebody would start that young and do things, that terrible. And, things do happen, unfortunately. Sadly, things happen. When Herman was 16 years of age, he graduated from high school. And when he finished high school, apparently he was working in some sort of, market, and where he met Clara Lovington. Clara Lovington was the daughter of another rich family, because apparently both of them were quite well off. And to say the least, with Holmes, like I said, he was very, very smart. And at this particular time, he was already planning to go to medical school. However, with Holmes, everything to do with him evolved around money. It was always money when it came to Holmes. And when he came to want to go to medical school, which he had prior plans to. He had plans to go to medical school ever since those kids put the skeleton's hands over his face. And instead of Holmes paying for his own way through medical school, he got his wife Clara to pay for it. So she was pretty much his meal ticket. She paid for him to go through medical school to become a doctor. During this time, she had a baby during this time. She bore Holmes's son. And when he went to, medical school, Holmes discovered something very interesting apart from, medicine. He discovered a very, very, let's say, dark skeleton in medical school's history. Their skeleton in the closet, so to speak. Back in the 1800s, or even prior to the 1800s, when you went off to medical school, they did not have plastic dummies to learn anatomy from. Plastic dummies for to learn where your bones are at, where your organs are. You didn't have that back then. And what they had to do instead, they had to rely on cadavers. Cadavers are pretty much dead bodies which were donated for science. However, not many people want to donate their body to science, and there was actually a shortage. So, to make sure that they got enough dead bodies for medical students, they in turn actually pay people to give them bodies who were less scrupulous, if you know what I'm saying. In other words, some of these bodies were victims of grave robbing. That these people would wait till funeral coming around. When somebody recently passed away, once the funeral was over, they would dig up the body and then sell the bodies. And other ways, sometimes people were even murdering other people for And when Holmes saw this, and saw, because the caretaker saw the caretaker giving money to someone for giving him so-called new arrivals, he realised that there was a profit to be made. So he, along with some of his colleagues, decided to do grave robbing. And quite a few times they did grave robbing and selling the bodies to medical schools so that he could pay for his way through medical school. Once again, it wasn't unheard of. No one frowned down upon it. He did not get thrown out of medical school for this. But this was something which was quite commonplace. This was very, very commonplace, and it happened all the time during this particular time period. And along the way, when he was doing this, he had the brilliant idea of doing insurance fraud. That he would steal some of these cadavers and saying that these people were the relatives of a mysterious H.H. Holmes, and insuring their lives for them, for these fictitious people who never existed. And then dumping their bodies in public areas for people to find, so that the insurance companies, eventually discover them and give him money. So, of course, he gained a lot of money through this. This was the start of his crimes. And at this time, he didn't really delve into murder as of yet, unless if he was responsible for Mary Mudget's murder or for her death. So you got that. But when he was about to finish, medical school, when he was finishing medical school and became Dr. Herman Webster Mudget, he didn't really like that. And he wanted a clean slate. A completely clean slate to start with a new life. Get away from his wife, get away from his child, and get away from his small town. He had better ideas. He had bigger, brighter ideas, and decided to do one big scam. So he would look at all the cadavers coming into the medical school. And he was looking for a particular person. He was looking for someone who looked like him. But none of them matched him. None of them. And eventually he got hold of his friend, because when you're in medical school and you're working on a cadaver, you're spending hours upon hours upon hours with another person dissecting bodies. So when you're spending that amount of time with someone, you build a bond. And these two doctors were best friends. To say the least, one person left and one person came back. And to say the least, it wasn't his friend. His friend was the closest thing to looking like him. So what he did, apparently he killed his friend, which I don't know his name. He murdered his friend, put all of his details in the coat pocket, and skived off. And changed his name. And forevermore, he would be known as Henry Howard Holmes. H. Holmes. For a period of time, no one knew what happened to H. Holmes, because he was travelling around all the time. He was going from place to place to place, constantly on the move, not knowing where he was, chasing after ladies, because he was a bit of a ladies' man, particularly if you got money. And he had engaged and married, a few other women after his wife Clara. Eventually, he made his way to Chicago. And in Chicago, when he went to Chicago in 1886, he came across the Holtons, Elizabeth S. Holton. There's a lot of myths to do with the Holtons. Holmes admitted that he killed the Holtons, and that these were an elderly couple looking after a drugstore. However, they probably were younger than Holmes. And furthermore, that the Holtons were actually alive and well when Holmes was executed. They were alive and well. But along the way, somewhere along the line, both the Holtons, both Mr. and Mrs. Holton, sold this chemist to Holmes. This made Holmes an extremely wealthy man. He became extremely, extremely wealthy. And as a result, he had his eye on a nice plot of land across the street. He had big plans with this place. He had massive plans for this plot of land. He had massive plans. I do not know whether he knew about the World's Fair coming. It is possible that he was aware, because everything was calculated with him. And to say the least, Holmes was fascinated with technology. Fascinated. If he was alive today, Holmes, I wouldn't put it past him with being an expert of computers and hacking people's accounts. I wouldn't put it past Holmes for being able to do this if he was alive today. But thank goodness for us, Holmes died nearly over a century ago. Thank goodness for us. And so he built this grand building. This grand building which had 3 floors. You had the bottom floor, which he planned to have a bunch of shops in. And then he had like the second floor, which I think was his personal residence. And then he had the upper floor, I think, for the hotel. I could have been getting them wrong. It could be that his personal residence is at the top floor, and then down below, which is private residence. I'm not exactly which way they were, but that's the way this building was. But this was what we could see from the outside. If you're walking down the street, or you didn't know what was going on, or you didn't have dealings with Holmes, you would just think it's just a big building. Nothing spectacular, just a big building. But this building had a dark side. There was another floor you cannot see. And this was the basement. This basement was just the same size as Holmes meticulously, designed this building. This building was pretty much a maze, and he built it this way. But to make sure no one knew what was really going on, he would hire people, then fire them. Hire, fire, hire, fire. And he did this right through the construction. And he always got out of paying them for saying, they would say things such as, I didn't like what he was doing. He was stealing things from me. I asked him to do this, but he didn't do this. And he did this deliberately so no one could put together what he was actually building. That this was pretty much a giant slaughterhouse. This was pretty much a murder factory. Because this place was a massive building. You had hallways that led to nowhere. You had rooms that were vaults. You had gas lines going to nowhere. You had hidden trapdoors in people's rooms. You even had, some cupboards with nooses inside. And this is what this building was like, It was full of this. It was the death house. Plain and simple. And, he was building it. And supposedly in 1888, Holmes and a colleague, whom we do not know, according to the book, disappeared for a certain amount of time. And at this particular time, Holmes was running out of funds. He was running out of money, which is not good for Holmes. And he needed to get money, and he needed to get money fast. But he was still in the cadaver scene. He was still in the cadavers. But for some reason, he decided to look elsewhere to sell cadavers. Which is a little bit extreme, but apparently he did. And if you believe the book of, Bloodstains by his descendant, he actually fled. He didn't really fled. He came back. He actually went over to the UK, or the United Kingdom. and started selling cadavers and skeletons to medical schools in London. And it is well documented that there was a rich American selling cadavers and skeletons to medical schools in 1888. I will tell you what's really interesting about 1888. At the end of this video, I will explain the reasons for, the significance of 1888. But eventually, he and his friend came back with the funds and started all over again, in Chicago and finishing the building. Once the building was done, there was a bunch of shops down there. There was, a jeweler's down there. You had a jeweler's. I think you had a pharmacy as well downstairs. And also he had a woman's job agency as well downstairs. Because back in those days, for starters, it was frowned upon for women to work. And women were just beginning to get recognition for working. Women were beginning to realize that they are able to work. That they can work if they want to work. Because prior to that, if you're a woman, you were primarily property of your husband or property to your father. You'd be property to your father until you wed. And when you wed, you're the property of your husband. And that's how, that was the life of a woman back in those days. And I'm not quite sure whether the same in the US, but I know over here in Australia, women were considered to be less capable than men. And they believed that because they're so delicate, so innocent and fragile, that if the husband died, the widow would have absolutely no legal rights to take the children. No legal rights. So if she's got about 6 or 7 children, she wouldn't get any of them. She wouldn't be looking after any of her children. And which nowadays, which is wrong. You know what I mean? It is wrong. But that's the way things were back in those days. Anyway, getting back to things. So he had this job agency for women. And when he was in charge of these little shops, getting money in, he fell in love with Julia Smythe. She was the wife of Ned Smythe. Oh, she was the wife of Ned Connor, sorry. And they ran the jewelry shop downstairs. She had an affair with him. And when Ned found out about it, he left. And one day, I think Julia discovered she was pregnant. And out of the blue, Julia disappeared, along with her daughter, Pearl. Now, they completely, disappeared on Christmas Eve in 1891. She completely, disappeared. Later on, Holmes said that she died during an abortion. Whether that is true or not, we do not know. And, he started, killing. And also around 1891 as well as when the World's Fair was around. And Holmes was seen quite a few times going, walking around, selling his hotel. Back in those days, you did not have online booking. No internet booking. You had no travel agents. No telephones. You had none of that. So you couldn't just say that. And you were able to get a place to stay by simply just turning up at the doorstep primarily. And just hope and pray they have a room. So a lot of people, got attracted by Holmes and went with him. And they were there and never seen again. They said approximately about, I think it was around about 10,000. I am not sure. But there was approximately 10,000, give or take, disappearances. People disappearing. And never to be seen or heard from again. And I think that there's probably a small portion of that would be related to Holmes. And others be just people getting up and leaving, pretty much. Because people did, people were quite, even though this was the 1800s, people were quite, mobile. And that's the way things were, people were quite mobile. And people, just disappeared. And because there was such an influx of people coming in, into Chicago at this particular time, that the police couldn't handle it. They could not handle it. And I can't really reckon back in those days, you could probably shoot somebody in the middle of a World's Fair and pretty much walk off scot-free. Because police were overwhelmed. The crowds outnumbered them literally hundreds to one. Because I think it was like maybe 50 policemen on duty at the time. And there were, like I said, tens of thousands of people going through the World's Fair. Because this was the World's Fair. You had new technology which was just coming about in the World's Fair. Chicago was the first city to ever be lit up by lights through electricity. This was the first city to have that. So to see Chicago light up with the power of technology, with the power of electricity, was fascinating for people back in the 1890s. And I just imagine that you used to see flame torches all the time when you went to go out at night. And then all of a sudden, you're seeing this nice electricity. You're seeing electricity lighting up lights, showing you the power of what electricity can do. So, a lot of people were attracted by it. So, and that's the reason why it was so popular back in the day. And somewhere along the line, he met a Minnie Williams. Minnie Williams was a wealthy landowner from Texas. She had a lot of land, and Holmes was apparently smitten by her. Like, he was smitten by her, and he asked her to marry him. He's already got 3 wives already. He never divorced Clara, his first wife. And now he's gone after Minnie. Because he had his eyes on Minnie's land. But, there's a big but. If something happened to Minnie, the land will not fall to him. It would fall to Minnie's sister, Nanny. Nanny Williams. And this became a big concern for Holmes. Very big. So what did he do? He arranged for Nanny to come and visit him. Not a good idea, guys. Not with Holmes. And Holmes went to meet Nanny at the train station. He told Nanny that Minnie was in the hotel and he wanted to surprise her for a wedding gift. He wanted to surprise her. So Nanny went with him. She had no idea what was going on. She had absolutely no idea. And she went with him to the castle, which was his big hotel. He also called it the castle. And somewhere along the line, he brought her into this big safe, this giant safe. It was pretty much like a bank vault. And said, "Oh, I'll go and get your sister waiting here." And they don't know whether he threw her in there or she went in there willingly. They do not know. All they do know is that Nanny was never seen again. And all what was left of Nanny was her footprint on the door. They actually saw a physical footprint on the door. They believe that he might have gassed her, that he could have lined the floors with acid, so she was literally burnt alive. Which is highly plausible, especially when we're talking about Holmes, because he was cruel. I don't think for one moment that he went to get Minnie. I don't think for one moment that he even left Nanny. I don't believe that one iota. I believe he was there. And he was probably quite happily watching and listening. And as I said, I think that he was, out there listening. He was listening, to this poor woman being brutally murdered. But along the way, he killed Minnie as well. Because both the heiresses disappeared. Never to be seen again. And also, that's what they pretty much happened. Let's talk about the basement. Now, this basement is a place of horrors. It was well and truly a place of horror. And what they did down there was very, very bad. He had a absolute giant, a glass bending furnace, which he used as a crematorium, which, he had in there to get rid of the bodies. He had dissection tables, which he also had in there as well. He had vats of acid. He had other things down there as well. It was a place of torture, primarily. And it wasn't good if you're a woman. It wasn't good whatsoever. And along the way, Holmes actually, left Chicago to go for his other ventures. And also when he was in Chicago, he was getting money from cadavers again, He was selling cadavers. But anyway, when he moved away, he got in trouble with the law, but it wasn't for fraud and it wasn't for murder. It was for stealing horses. And he was actually sentenced to jail, which wasn't exactly a good idea for Holmes, because he came up with another idea and made another friend. He had a few friends, well, dark friends. And he had a plan to off himself, or to kill himself. But with Holmes, he loved himself too much. He wanted his insurance money. But killing the one, the only H.H. Holmes was going to light up every single red flag or red light with all the insurance companies. They know him. And if he mysteriously died and there's a big will for him, they can't do it. So he decided with his conspirators, one of them was Benjamin Peitzel. And they conducted with Peitzel, Benjamin, to fabricate Benjamin Peitzel's death. And Benjamin Peitzel, his family, would disappear overseas, probably over to the UK again. And Benjamin agreed to it and going, yeah, sure, I'll do it. You could pretend with me. And Holmes would take, say 10% of the money, while the rest of the money goes to Benjamin Peitzel and his family. However, when he did this, because they were looking for cadavers. They were looking for cadavers to look like Peitzel. But they couldn't find one. So Holmes decided to kill Peitzel for real. And he knocked him out with chloroform and burnt him alive. They made it look like a lab explosion. His wife was in it as well. Not Holmes' wife, Peitzel's wife. And she and the children confirmed that was Peitzel, but they strongly believed that it wasn't her husband Benjamin that was laying there on the slab, it was another man. Little did she know that it actually was Benjamin. So, of course, the money got released, and Holmes took it. And Holmes decided to screw everyone and take it all for himself, which was a bad move. And when Holmes disappeared, he took away 3 of the Peitzel's children, which was Alice, Nellie, and Howard Peitzel. And he was taking them from, place to place to place, and not telling them where they were going. There were some accounts that he also had his wife and the other 2 children as well with him as well, but he separated them. He moved them all around differently. And when Alice and Nellie were sending letters to their mother, the mother never received their letters. Never. And children vanished, along the way. Howard was the first kid to go, little Howard Peitzel. Apparently they think that he was drugged, dissected, and then his remains were burnt in a stove and his ashes were shoved in the chimney. Not a very nice way to go for an innocent little boy. The next two to die would be Alice and Nellie. They were forced into a trunk, naked, and were gassed to death because Holmes turned this trunk into a makeshift gas chamber. They're not quite sure whether he sexually abused the girls. There was strong suspicions that he did. And when he had these two little girls, when there were, two dead little girls, he hastily buried their bodies on Vincent Street in Toronto. The mother had no idea that her children were dead. She had no idea that her husband was dead. But along the way, Holmes got arrested. And they were charging him with the death of Benjamin Pitezel. But when they realised Pitezel's children were missing, they got very concerned. And with Holmes, he has one thing what a lot of serial killers have. He has an ego. He has a major ego. And with this ego, he took souvenirs. Just like most serial killers today, they take souvenirs. Holmes is no different. He took souvenirs. His souvenirs from the children were the letters to their mother. He took the letters. And of course the police found these letters, traced where he came from, and eventually finding the 3 dead children. Since that particular date, the police started searching all over the place. And eventually made their way to Chicago, where they found the House of Horrors, the murder castle in Chicago. And when they went downstairs, apparently the stench of rotten flesh was very overpowering. And the people who had to fight and rescue as many people as possible during the Chicago Fire, never seen anything like this. They never seen anything like this. They never experienced anything like this, and they dealt with death, a lot of charcoal bodies because of the Chicago Fire. What happened a few years prior to this. And they were completely shocked because apparently there was literally a whole mound of bones, of human bones, just piled up in the middle of the corner of the room. There were medical tools all over the place. They also have found remains in the furnace. There was human remains left in the furnace. There was human remains in jars, in vats. It was something out of a horror movie. And I reckon there probably would have been blood everywhere. And they realised they had a serial killer on their hands. And when they went to investigate it, or speak to Holmes, they, spoke to him, and he was reported to say, he was stated to say, "I was born with the devil in me. I could not help the fact that I was a murderer, no more than the poet can help the inspiration to sing. I was born with the evil one standing as my sponsor beside the bed where I was ushered into the world, and he has been with me since." So they say he had a couple of screws loose. And as a result, he was charged. He was charged with the murders. He was, charged with murder, and he was prosecuted. Prosecuted for the murder of Benjamin Peitel, and he was sentenced to death. And on the 7th of May, 1896, at Moymensin Prison, also known as the Philadelphia County Prison, H. Holmes, or Henry Howard Holmes, or Herman Webster Mudget, was walked to the gallows and hung. Prior to his execution, he ordered to have about 10 feet of concrete poured on top of his coffin, because he did not want people to do to him what he did to other people. And because of this, there was a lot of suspicions that that he faked his death, that he planned it, he faked it, because right afterwards there was something called the Holmes curse. People who had any involvement with Holmes, whether to do with the court proceedings, legal proceedings, witnesses, succumb to mysterious circumstances. They end up dead. Some of them mysteriously turned up dead in their homes, in the street, out in the bay, and they called it the Holmes curse, and this went for about 50 years. They called this the Holmes curse. And there was a lot of theories that Holmes was doing it. That Holmes was doing, doing these murders. And when they were doing this, they actually discovered how he was killing some of these people. Some of these people were gassed, like he did with the Peitel children. Some of them were burnt alive. And some of them, was pretty much, had an autopsy. You might be thinking, an autopsy, that's not really that bad. You do an autopsy when you're dead. You're dead. Autopsy is quite common. I will say yes to that, but not this type of autopsy. If you were a young woman and he fancied you, because for Holmes, for some reason, he went backwards. And if he fancied you and you were a woman, you would be put into a room with probably a nice bed. It looked like a nice room. And once you go in there, you're probably feeling very drowsy, you're feeling very sleepy, and you think you've had a hard day. So you go to bed and have a rest. Little do you know, Holmes is feeding you gas. When you fall asleep, Holmes turns off the gas, he comes in, carries you from your bed, takes you down to the basement, ties you up to a gurney, and then you wake up with Holmes being in the room. And he will be standing there with a leather apron, standing literally right next door to you. And he would pretty much perform an autopsy on you while you were still alive and fully awake. And he would start first with the sexual organs, removing the uterus, the ovaries first. That'd be the first thing he would take. And he would literally destroy the body, literally remove people's organs, and that's how you died. He would literally pull you apart from the inside out, which is a horrible way to go. And he did this to a lot of women. And they ever asked him, did he ever love anyone? And he said he believed he loved Minnie Williams, and he regret killing Minnie Williams, because he thought they actually did love her. And that's what he pretty much was doing. Some people were hung, gassed, and all that, which I already said. But, to this day, or to a couple of years ago actually, a lot of people had strong suspicions that Holmes escaped the gallows. That he escaped the gallows, and what better way to start off fresh if the government themselves believe that they killed you? What better way? If the government believes that they killed you, the government can't really do anything. They can't do anything. So his great-great-great-grandson decided to dig up his great-great-grandpa. And to say the least, they exhumed the body, and surprise, surprise, the remains in the coffin were none other than H.H. Holmes. He did not escape the gallows. What about the Holmes curse for the 50 years? Was it Holmes' spirit, if you believe in the paranormal? Was it cursed? Was his evil so evil that when he died, it lived on and got its revenge on the people who wronged him? Who knows? We do not know. Alright, let's have a little bit of a chat about the significance of 1888. If you guys know or don't know, or even recognise that year, 1888, being in London in 1888. 1888 is very, very popular in British history. If you typed in 1888, there will be probably one big major thing what will be popping up over and over again would be the murders in Whitechapel. Guys, we are talking about Jack the Ripper. And there's strong suspicions, especially the way Jack the Ripper was killing his girls, was the same way as H.H. Holmes was killing his girls. Because remember what I said to you, he performed autopsies while the person was still alive, removing their organs and displaying them. Taking out the inside and displaying them. Jack the Ripper did the same thing. Exactly the same thing. So, the MO is similar. They said that Jack the Ripper could have been a medical man because just trying to remove the uterus without damaging the bladder would have taken a surgeon's skill. But there's a lot of debate about it. Some doctors said it would take a surgeon's skill. It takes a surgeon to do it. And especially that these crimes usually happen at night. And in 1888, you couldn't see anything. In 1888, if you're walking around Whitechapel, you had coal furnaces burning right through London, not just in Whitechapel, but right through London. There probably would have been coal furnaces in Windsor Castle, no doubt. There would, so that's to do with the royal family. Because that's how people warmed their houses back in those days. Coal furnaces was very, very imported back in the 1880s and back in the 1800s. And because of these coal furnaces, at night it produced a black smog over the city. And you had oil lamps, so visibility was extremely poor. So this person, whoever he was, had to do all of his cutting pretty much blinded. He wouldn't be able to see anything. And I said that probably would take a surgeon, because somebody who's doing it over and over again. Holmes does have the experience. He performed this over and over and over and over and over again. Holmes has the skills. Holmes matches the compository sketches which you see here. So Holmes, that is a real good fit for Jack the Ripper. Do I personally think Holmes, Jack the Ripper are one the same? No. You might be thinking, Baby, you just said Holmes did the same thing over in Chicago. And he's performed this over and over again. It has to be Holmes. Who else could it be? And Holmes was also in London in 1888. What's the coincidences of that? What is the coincidence of having two serial killers walking around London at the same time with the same type of MO? I would have to answer with a couple of things. Alright. Sorry, guys. Let's look at the crimes themselves. The MOs between Jack the Ripper and Holmes. Holmes is organised serial killer. He was 100% organised. He was organised. He is the poster child for being an organised serial killer. He has high intelligence. He is a genius. Holmes is a genius. And thank goodness that he's on our time. Holmes is a genius. Holmes planned things. Like, Holmes was so methodical about his crimes. Even prior to him committing crimes and becoming a serial killer, they actually went off to medical school to learn how to kill and to dispose of bodies. He actually went there to learn how to kill. Not to save lives, but to learn how to kill. That takes extreme planning. Even Angels of Death don't do that. Like Harold Shipman, he didn't go to medical school to learn how to kill. Oh no. And even anyone else with the Angel of Death title. Holmes is not an Angel of Death. More likely work with a Satan if you ask me. But regardless, with Holmes, he planned things. With Holmes, another thing. None of Holmes's victims were discovered, with the exception of those who he had an insurance on. The ones that had insurance were the ones that were found. The ones that weren't found, the ones that he didn't want found, were the ones he hid. You never ever found any of his victims who he wanted to hide. They have never discovered where Minnie Williams is, or Nanny Williams. There's no sign of them. There was no sign of Pearl. The little girl Pearl. There was no sign of her either. And there was no sign of Julia as well. There was no sign of these women. None. And the reason for that is Holmes didn't want them to be found. And if he didn't want you to be found, you weren't found. Full stop. Period. And the ones that were found, there was insurance connected to them. Always insurance. Now, let's look at Jack the Ripper. Jack the Ripper's victims. There were 5, the canonical 5, but there could be others as well. That these women were brutally murdered in Whitechapel in London. They were brutally murdered. These women were not, I repeat that, these women were not led to their deaths by Jack the Ripper. Instead, they themselves led Jack the Ripper to where they were murdered. It was the victims, not the perpetrator, who led them to a place where they were slaughtered. Jack the Ripper is commonly called an unorganized serial killer. He is unorganized. The only organized thing Jack the Ripper ever did was he carried a knife. That was the only organized thing Jack the Ripper ever did, was carry a knife. And that was it, guys. He just carried a knife. That was it with Jack the Ripper. Jack the Ripper never planned any of his murders. Jack the Ripper took risks. By Jove, he took a lot of risks. And one of these risks was pretty much nearly done in broad daylight. Holmes would never, ever, 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 ever in a million years would take that risk. No way. Holmes would not do that because because if you got caught, it's bad for business. With Holmes, it's business. It's always business. Murder is business. You got money from murder. What's the point if you're going to the gallows? That's bad for business. You can't get money from the gallows. You can't get money through that. So what's the point killing a woman pretty much at broad daylight, like Jack the Ripper did with one of his victims? It was only one, but it was pretty much in broad daylight. So why the hell that happened? And also, with that particular murder, the same murder, Jack the Ripper literally had to walk through somebody's entire house. It wasn't his house, it was somebody else's house. He walked through somebody's entire house. Murdered his victims. I think it was Polly Nichols. I could be wrong. Went through the person's house, or led through the house by the victim, because remember, the victim always took him there. Murdered her, and walked out through the house. There would have been dozens of people living in that house. Dozens. That does not make any sense. If it was Holmes, that's too much danger, for Holmes. 1, broad daylight. 2, going through a strange person's house. Too dangerous. Way too dangerous. Holmes would have never done that. Not for Holmes. And also, another thing, with Jack the Ripper, with the murder of Liz Stride, that when Liz Stride was assaulted, a Polish Jew, and this was the one where we got the compository sketch from, saw a man fitting Holmes' description, and he yelled out, he yelled out to the Polish Jew, Lipski. Lipski was a name of a Polish Jew who was hung for murder. It is possible that Holmes did his homework. It was possible. But here's the key fact. The person who yelled out Lipski, the person who we got the compository sketch from, was a lookout. He was watching. He was seeing where the coast was clear while his pal was beating the crap out of Liz Stride, thrusting her down on the cobble steps. He was a lookout. He wasn't doing the assaulting. Someone else was doing the assaulting. So, that in itself. Do I think that Holmes could have been involved with Jack the Ripper? Plausible. And it could be highly probable. Remember, Holmes did not go to London on his own. Holmes went with somebody else. Holmes went with somebody else to London. It is highly plausible that whoever this mysterious man is, the true Jack the Ripper, was a colleague of Holmes. And he probably was working along with Holmes doing these terrible crimes on women in Chicago. And was probably being trained by Holmes. And Holmes ordered him to Whitechapel to commit murders on the orders of Holmes to be Jack the Ripper. And if he was doing that, then he was covering it up. It was something to, make something really, really hidden. Because with him, he was a master chess player, to say the least. It was a big game to him. And if he was responsible for it, my suggestion is, fair enough, you can't really see what was going around 1888. I would be looking for people who have gone missing in places like Mayfair. Places like Mayfair, the east side of London. I think it's the east side. That, where the rich are. You need to look where the rich are at that particular time. Not in Whitechapel. Because there will be missing persons. And probably there might be women. It doesn't matter if you're poor or rich. People go missing all the time. It doesn't matter your wealth status, whether you're poor or rich. First class or third class. Are you part of the rich? Or are you part of the poor? And there would have been a lot of reasons for that, because the simple fact is that in 1888, Holmes wanted to sell cadavers. And he learned in his past that he cannot bump people over the head. I mean, literally, getting like a baseball bat and bashing somebody's head in. He could not do that because that damages the body and he can't sell it. It's worthless. So you can't do that. But there was something different between Whitechapel, between the poor parts of London and the rich parts. And I can sum that up with one word: disease. There was a disease that made terrible markings on the skin and terrible markings on the bone. That it pretty much would rot away your skin and pretty much rot away your bones as well. That a lot of people were walking around with their noses missing, big chunks of the cheek missing, their lips all mangled and all yucky and pus all over the place. This disease, this terrible disease, syphilis. A sexually transmitted disease. You either get syphilis through having unprotected sex, or you are born with it. That your mother had syphilis. More often than not, prostitutes were more in the poorer classes. However, there were high-end girls for the rich, because most of the rich, even say with the royal families, they did go looking for some playtime. That they would have girls, but these girls would have been high-end girls who had no disease and who were clean. So they wouldn't really have disease. As with people in poorer classes, more often than not they had a drinking problem. Because back in those days, alcohol is pretty much the equivalent of what we have today, let's say, of hard drugs like heroin and ice. People become addicted to it, and they are dependent on it, and they lose everything. And that's the reason why they got forced into prostitution. Back in those days, it wasn't heroin, it wasn't ice, it was alcohol. And women were forced into prostitution to feed their habit. Just like today. Just the method is different. And a lot of women, came down with this, disease. Life expectancy in the poor places wasn't very long. Children born in Whitechapel were very lucky to reach up to the age of 5. They were very, very lucky if they reached 5 years of age, let alone growing to adulthood. And that was in 1888. So yeah, if he was killing them, then he was doing it, to distract people, distract them from his true goals and his true crimes. I do not think that they are the same. Well, that's my opinion. Well, hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. Have a great day, and blessed be.